Hello there, I'm Lina Ahmedou. Welcome to Africa 54. Here is what's coming up. ECOWAS warns of worsening insecurity in the region after junta-led alliance of Sahel states signs a confederation treaty, shifting away further from regional and Western allies. A NATO summit in Washington this week will address Ukraine's membership in the Atlantic Alliance and global security concerns. And the story of Sharada Maganti, an Indian expat who has lived in Kano for 40 years. All that and much more on Africa 54. We begin in Nigeria, where the Regional Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, is raising alarm over disintegration and worsening insecurity after junta-led Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger made clear their intentions to leave the bloc by signing a confederation treaty. Formalizing the treaty to establish a confederation confirms the rejection by Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso of the 15-member Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Its signing comes a day before an ECOWAS summit, which had hoped to persuade the three to reconsider their decision in January to quit the bloc. The three countries are struggles to contain a decade-old battle with Islamist insurgents and grow economies that are among the world's poorest.
Ordinary session to once again review the situation in our region. We are aware of the enormous challenges, including terrorist activities and violent extremism, threatening to spread from Sahel region towards the coastal states, especially those that witnessed constitutional changes of government. The decision of the three Sahel countries of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to withdraw from ECOWAS has also been noticed.
To complicate the situation, our region has become the arena of geostrategic and geopolitical rivalries and the theater of misinformation and disinformation that engenders mistrust among and within communities and undermine social cohesion.
The ECOWAS leaders approved the decision to mobilize a 5,000-strong regional standby counterterrorism force. For more insight into the implications of the decision by the three Sahel nations to leave ECOWAS, I am joined in the studio by Nyaka Lagoke, Professor of African Studies at Lincoln University in the state of Pennsylvania. Professor Lagoke, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much for having me.
So what do you make of the two summits that took place over the weekend? First, AES, the Alliance of Sahel States, and then followed the next day by ECOWAS. What do you make of some of the decisions that came out of them?
I think that, to go quick and fast, it shows the division of approaches in the region about those who are aspiring to get
each other against outside threats and internal security. Can they find success by doing it alone? Or will a divided Sahel make regional challenges even more difficult?
No, but at least they're doing something that was not happening. They won because, you know, most countries in Africa, particularly in that region, they're facing a common threat, terrorism. So you cannot fight terrorism alone. Because they're fighting a common threat, so they need to come together and pool the energies and the resources together. So it's a good way because, don't forget it, they are looking for the sovereign security or the sovereignty of the security.
Quickly, France had an election, and we know what is happening between the three countries and France. Very briefly, what do you make of it? Listen,
I am smiling because Macron is in difficulty. And then he's facing, because he was, I don't want to use like a harsh word, but he overestimated himself. And then history will record him as somebody under whose watch France lost Africa. Okay, Mr. Professor Nyakalagoke, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And that was Professor Nyakalagoke. He's a professor of African Studies at Lincoln University. In another development, the U.S. military withdrew its personnel from Niger's Air Base 101 near the airport in the capital Niamey on Sunday, ahead of its exit from a major drone base near the desert city of Agadez in the coming weeks. David Doyle has more.
The U.S. military said on Sunday it had completed its withdrawal from a major airbase in Niger. Airbase 101, located near the airport in the capital Niamey, had been used to tackle militant groups in the Sahel region. But in April, and following a coup last year, Niger's ruling junta ordered the US to withdraw its nearly 1,000 military personnel from the country. US Air Force Major General Kenneth Ekman said the focus would now shift to leaving Airbase 201, a $100 million drone facility near the desert city of Agadez.
Both United States and Nigerian officials are dedicated to completing a safe, orderly, and responsible withdrawal by September 15, 2024. They emphasize their commitment to the protection and security of American forces during this process.
Niger and its military-led neighbours, Burkina Faso and Mali, have torn up defence agreements with US, European and United Nations forces. Instead, they fostered closer defence, diplomatic and business ties with Russia. In April, Russia sent military trainers to Niger. Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger also signed a confederation treaty on Saturday, signalling an ever closer alignment between the countries that has reshaped international influence in the region.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. Leaders of NATO's 32-member countries meet this week in Washington for a summit of the Transatlantic Security Alliance with further support for Ukraine in the war against Russia's invasion high on their agenda. NATO will also roll out concrete ways to accelerate Ukraine's eventual membership in the Atlantic Alliance. VOA State Department Bureau Chief Nike Chang has more.
As the Russia-Ukraine war rages on with no end in sight, the United States will host leaders of the 32-member alliance for the annual NATO summit that runs from July 9th to 11th in Washington. Boosting Ukraine's security and addressing challenges from China are high on the agenda, according to U.S. officials.
Whether that's supporting Ukraine in its defense against Russian aggression, whether that's working with partners to ways in which we can build the resilience of allies to confront the threats and challenges from the PRC, whether this is hybrid threats, cyber threats, these are all the issues that we'll be focusing on at the summit.
The U.S. and its NATO allies have said that Ukraine's future lies in the alliance, and next week the group will unveil concrete steps to bring Ukraine closer towards NATO membership. Some U.S. lawmakers are expressing concern about Ukraine's readiness to join the alliance, even as the embattled country commits itself to internal reforms. But the summit's focus is not just on Ukraine and European security. Analysts note NATO is also beginning to explore a larger role in the Indo-Pacific.
Australia, New Zealand, the Republic of Korea, and Japan are very interested in deepening their cooperation with NATO, and in those areas, not necessarily direct military-to-military cooperation, but some areas of where there is cooperation going on.
In celebration of NATO's 75th anniversary, more than 24 social media influencers have been invited to observe the proceedings and create content to commemorate the milestone. For Nike Ching, Elizabeth Cherneff, VOA News, Washington.
This coming week could be consequential for U.S. President Joe Biden's re-election bid as voices continue to grow for him to lead the race amid concern over his age and capacity to lead. So far, however, he still has the support of many of his peers, even as they acknowledge Democratic voters' worries. VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias reports.
U.S. President Joe Biden addressed a friendly crowd Sunday during a church service in Philadelphia. He talked about his achievements even as concerns about his age and capacity to lead continue to grow. Following his recent poor debate performance, the president has only doubled down on his determination to remain in the presidential race. He made his position clear during Friday's exclusive interview with ABC News anchor George Stephanopoulos.
I don't think anybody's more qualified to be president or win this race than me.
Biden still enjoys broad support for his re-election bid among his peers, but worries among voters are growing and were acknowledged by Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, who appeared Sunday on CNN's State of the Union show.
Not questions about his character or his decency or who he cares about or who he fights for, but questions as to whether this is still the old Joe Biden.
The decision on whether to leave the presidential race is for Biden to make, Democratic Representative Adam Schiff told NBC's Meet the Press, stressing it will be consequential for the general election.
Joe Biden is going to need to consider for his own sake and his own legacy, can he beat Donald Trump? He's the best to beat Donald Trump. But also the profound impact this decision, maybe the most important of his presidency, will have on the House, on the Senate, on the future of the country.
On Saturday, Donald Trump took to his Truth Social platform and wrote, quote, "Crooked Joe Biden should ignore his many critics and move forward with alacrity and strength with his powerful and far-reaching campaign." While the headlines have focused on Biden, Trump's vice president pick could steal the spotlight if announced this week.
He's got a lot of good people he could choose from. It's the policies that worked and the leadership style that worked for the American people. I think we have to bring that back to the White House.
President Biden's attention will turn to the NATO summit, which he will host in Washington starting Tuesday, while Trump is expected to rally in Doral, Florida, and Butler, Pennsylvania, this week. Veronica Balderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
In what is considered a victory for former U.S. President Donald Trump, the Supreme Court has held that former presidents have broad immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts, but that immunity does not extend to personal acts. Philip Alexiou talks with Victoria Nurse, Executive Director of the Center on Congressional Studies at Georgetown Law. She says it could affect Special Counsel Jack Smith's indictment of Trump.
It's quite uncertain how this will play out in Jack Smith's special counsel indictment of former President Trump. We're going to hear a lot about the difference between official and personal acts. I'll give you an example of each one. There are some things that are clear. For example, if the president orders, that Osama bin Laden, a terrorist, is killed, the next president can't prosecute him for a crime. All right, because that was an official act on behalf of the American people that he has the commander-in-chief authority to pursue. That's an official act. A personal act would be, let's say that he robbed a store. That would be a personal act. And took the money to pay for something. In between, however, is a hypothetical raised in the court below and raised by the dissenting justices, which is, what if he orders SEAL Team 6 to kill his political opponent? Now, that just ordering SEAL Team 6 may look like an official act, but he's doing it for a personal reason. The Supreme Court appears to say that the personal reason does not matter. And that has gotten people very concerned. Now, and that's what elicited dissenting voices that, in fact, the opinion would, in fact, license insurrection. It would license a coup. I believe that this is not what the majority intended. Our rule of law is very strong, and we're going to see it in action when it goes down to the trial court.
So I find it interesting, you mentioned it on the January 6th riot, where the courts would have to decide where they stand with regard to official acts or personal acts as he's campaigning or not. Of course, if you're the President of the United States and you're campaigning to be reelected, it seems, well, you can make the argument from a layman's term, well, that's still an official act. It's kind of interesting where it goes.
It is interesting. His speech is certainly protected under the Supreme Court's current opinion. On the other hand, if you work in the White House, you know that every president and vice president has a set of lawyers who divide his time between campaign events and public events, because it is a felony for anyone to spend money to campaign. The taxpayers don't pay for campaigns, and they don't want to pay for campaigns. So that's an additional wrinkle here. I'm not so sure the Supreme Court was aware of that. But we'll see what happens in the trial court as they deal with this, because you've just raised one of the questions. Were those speeches in some way official? Now, it would be interesting to see how the Trump White House actually classified that event. And I believe that the D.C. Circuit has already held in a case called Blasingame that this was classified as a campaign event and therefore personal. But that would be subject to question in the lower court as we proceed.
Also, another issue is some of his conversations with then Vice President Mike Pence, and whether those conversations are going to be private and official acts. What about that?
That's going to be an interesting question, because the court said that they were presumptively immune, but that was a rebuttable presumption. And it's not quite clear what it would take to rebut that presumption. Presumably, if there were an order to kill the vice president for a personal campaign reason, that would be personal. But the opinion, unfortunately, and I think this was the saddest thing about it, wasn't particularly clear. And so we want the rule of law to be clear. We want it to be stable. Business wants stability, wants certainty. It will be up to the district court judge to try to hear the arguments, and the American people will see that, and I think that's a good thing.
VOA's Philip Alexiou speaking with Victoria Nurse, Executive Director of the Center on Congressional Studies at Georgetown Law. Still to come, the story of an Indian expatriate who moved to Nigeria's state of Kano 40 years ago. We'll be right back.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
In other news, a United
due to similarities between the Indian and the Hausa family value system.
We have power cuts, we have lack of, probably insecurity, probably no water situation, or going into the rural area, the communication between people. All these were each situations that were needed to be handled. And I felt, each situation gave me the spirit to move forward. I've seen the Hausa culture is similar to the Indian culture, whether it is, the family relationships or the affection, the family togetherness, and also respecting elders and the religious values.
Professor Tijani Nania is a specialist on Middle Eastern and other non-African migrants. He says the colonial and post-colonial era of Nigeria saw an increase in numbers of non-African migrants. He says unlike Chinese migrants, Lebanese and Indian nationals assimilate either into the Kano communities. Historically, non-African migrants, particularly Arabs from Middle East, started coming to Nigeria for business activities in the 19th century. Multiple generations of Lebanese have made their home in Nigeria. Most of them descendants of those who arrived in Nigeria in the 19th century. Indian and many other non-African migrants started migrating to Nigeria during colonial and post-colonial period and continued to live in Nigeria. Their stay says Sadiq Saluh Abubakar has helped in developing many sectors in Nigeria.
The presence of these migrants has fostered a spirit of cultural exchange and mutual growth. They bring diverse perspectives and skills, enriching the whole society in numerous ways, from technological advancements and educational contributions to economic growth and job creation. Their impact is deeply felt and appreciated. Their integration into the community has also strengthened social ties.
Many of the youth in Kano have learned to speak Hindu, and some of them without going to any school. They are fluent in Hindu and what have you. Contact with India has a lot of impact in the language, in the development of Hindu language in Kano, for example. Yes, but for the Chinese, I haven't learned about so, and I haven't observed one, except that the Chinese are more eager to learn Hausa. And some of them, very few, to stay in the city, but many of them preferring to have their own residential houses in the companies where they work.
While many Nigerians move out of Nigeria in search of greener pastures, for Sharada Maganti, living in Kano has been the best decision of her life.
It has been the best part of my life. So I always say, right now, in any of my seminars, I say that Kano has given me life, and it is time for me to give back to Kano.
According to Statista, Nigeria hosts 1.3 million international migrants, which is the largest share of non-African migrants in the entire West Africa, with Indian expatriates contributing the largest share. More than 50,000 Indians live in Nigeria, followed by Lebanese. Since 2014, a significant increase has been noted in the number of Chinese migrants in Nigeria due to recent construction and mining activities. Al-Hassan Bala, VOA News, Abuja, Nigeria.
That's our show for today. Thanks for watching.